In this video, you'll discover how sacred Tibetan chanting actually works, why their voices vibrate so low, why the sound feels physical, and what these chants are truly meant to do inside the mind. Not as relaxation, but as an ancient technology created to shape consciousness. But there's one detail almost no one knows. The voice you hear isn't coming from just one voice at all. Let's start at the beginning, before the unusual sound, before the technique, before anyone talked about overtone chanting. We're in the high plateaus of Tibet, centuries ago, where literacy was rare and monasteries served as the main centers of memory. Monks didn't just pray there, they stored knowledge for entire communities. And that's where chanting first becomes practical. In many early monastic settings, written texts were scarce. A single scripture might take months to copy by hand, and even when it existed, few people could read it. So chanting became a living library. Instead of relying on pages, monks carried teachings in their voices. A long melody or rhythmic pattern was easier to memorize than plain speech. If a group repeated the same chants every morning and every night, entire philosophies could live in sound long before they lived in ink. Some teachers even described chanting as binding meaning into vibration, which basically meant if you could remember the tune, you could remember the teaching. But chanting wasn't only about memory. It was also a tool to coordinate people. Monasteries could house dozens or even hundreds of monks, and they needed ways to move, think, and focus together. Chanting created that rhythm. When a large group shared a single steady note, their breathing aligned without effort. When breathing aligned, movements aligned. And when movements aligned, discipline didn't require shouting or constant correction. The chant replaced the need for commands. It was like early social technology, a simple sound that made a whole community act as one. There was also a practical side to the deep tone itself. High in the Himalayan mountains, cold air makes breathing shallow. Deep, slow sounds force the chest to expand more than normal speech. That expansion stimulates the vagus nerve, which influences heart rate and mental calm. Ancient monks didn't understand the biology in modern terms, but they understood the effect. A slow, low chant settled the mind and sharpened alertness. So the sound wasn't chosen for beauty, it was chosen because it worked on the body. Another important piece is what some monasteries call tonal ritual. In these traditions, the sound carries more weight than the literal meaning of the syllables. A chant might have philosophical significance, but the vibration is considered the real mechanism. For monks, how the chant resonates inside the body matters more than what the words say. They aren't trying to make a performance, they're trying to shape their inner state through resonance. It's a bit like tuning a musical instrument before playing it, except the instrument is the mind. And within these ancient halls, you can imagine the effect. Dozens of young monks kneeling in silence, then a single senior monk giving the first low note. The sound grows, layer by layer, until it feels like it's coming from the walls themselves. The ritual doesn't begin with candles or bells, it begins with the voice. Still, none of this explains the part that fascinates people today. The strange quality of the sound. Visitors often say it doesn't feel like it's coming from a human throat. Some describe it as a stacked sound, like 2 or 3 voices layered together. Others say it feels like the sound vibrates inside their chest, even when they're standing several feet away. And they're not imagining that. The chant is built to be felt as much as heard. Something unusual is happening inside the body of each monk. A technique that developed over generations, passed down orally, refined during hours of training every day. It turns a single throat into what sounds like multiple voices. The monks don't talk about it as a secret, but it's something they rarely explain in full, because it's meant to be learned through practice with a teacher, not just described. So the origins tell us what chanting is for: memory, coordination, clarity, stability, and the shaping of internal states. But to understand why it sounds almost inhuman, we have to go deeper. The answer is not in the history, it's inside the body itself. And that brings us to the part most people never see: the technique that creates a sound that seems impossible for a single human being. Now that we know why chanting was created, we can finally look at how monks generate that unmistakable sound. If you've ever heard it in person, you know it doesn't feel like a normal voice. It's low, almost resonant like a drum, and sometimes it splits into more than one tone at the same time. People assume it's a group effect, but even a single monk can produce it. The technique is ancient, and although many schools teach it, only a minority of monks truly master it. The foundation is something known globally as overtone or diphonic chanting. In simple terms, it means the monk uses one throat to create 2 tones simultaneously. One tone is the deep bass note, that low vibrating sound that makes the floor hum. The second tone is a higher whistle-like note riding above it. If you listen closely to recordings, you can often hear that thin harmonic floating above the main chant. Western musicians discovered this technique much later, but Tibetan monks have practiced it for generations. Getting there requires unusual control of the throat. A monk learns to tighten the larynx in specific ways, almost like adjusting the valves on a wind instrument. This tension narrows the air channel so the sound waves split. It isn't painful, but it takes practice to do it safely. Younger monks spend months making simple, low drone sounds before they can even try the harmonic layer. Teachers say the mistake beginners make is pushing too hard, when the real skill is relaxing everything except the tiny muscles around the vocal folds. Breath is the next piece. Many monasteries use a form of circular breathing adapted from older Himalayan traditions. It's not identical to the technique used by some woodwind players, but the idea is similar, keeping the sound continuous. A monk inhales through the nose while maintaining a stable outward pressure from the chest and throat, letting the notes stay unbroken. To an outside listener, it feels like the chant goes on far longer than one normal breath. In reality, it's a series of tiny micro-refills of air that keep the vibration steady. When you see a monk chanting for minutes without the pitch wobbling, that's what's happening. Then there's resonance, how they make their whole body act as an amplifier. The deep tone isn't made in the throat alone. It's shaped in the chest, the jaw, the mouth cavity, even the skull. Monks talk about chest voice and head voice, not in the sense of opera singing, but in terms of where the vibration sits. When the chant drops into the chest, the entire upper body becomes a resonating chamber. When it shifts toward the head, you get that airy, sharper overtone. Combined, the two create the illusion of multiple voices coming from one mouth. Another characteristic of Tibetan chanting is the ritual growl. Though monks don't call it that. It's produced by a controlled flutter of the vocal folds. Not a roar, not a scream. Just enough friction to make the note rumble. You can feel it when you place your hand on your sternum during a chant. That tiny rasp gives the chant its signature depth. It's also why recordings sometimes make the chant sound like a low engine idling. The important thing is that the rasp is intentional and extremely precise. Too much tension and the sound collapses. Too little and it loses its power. And then we get to the syllables. They might sound random to someone who isn't familiar with Tibetan liturgy, but they're anything but random. The syllables in a chant are selected because of how they shape airflow and resonance. Some syllables open the throat wide, creating a powerful bass note. Others narrow the mouth, pulling the sound upward into the head. Different chants are designed to create different mental states, and the phonetics are part of that design. A syllable like OM, for example, naturally produces a layered sound because it begins deep in the chest and ends at the lips. But many rituals use more complex sequences specifically for their acoustic qualities. When you put all these elements together, overtone technique, circular breathing, chest and head resonance, controlled laryngeal tension, and carefully chosen syllables, you get a chant that feels less like a single voice and more like a physical presence. Tourists often say the sound seems to wrap around them. In some temples, the acoustics are built to enhance this effect, with thick walls that bounce low frequencies and wooden floors that carry vibration. It's deliberate. The architecture is part of the instrument. Despite all this technical detail, monks rarely talk about chanting as a performance skill. They don't see it as singing. They see it as shaping the mind through vibration. The physical method is a doorway, but not the destination. Because the real effect of the chant doesn't occur in the air around the monk. It occurs inside him. And that leads us to the most important question: what happens within a monk during chanting, mentally, emotionally, and physiologically, that makes this ritual so central to their training? We've looked at the origin and the technique. Now we step into the real core of the ritual, what the chant actually does to the person producing it. If you watch monks chanting, you'll notice they don't look like they're performing. Their eyes soften, their shoulders drop, and their breathing becomes steady and almost automatic. Something internal is happening, something that can't be captured by microphones or descriptions of throat mechanics. This is the part that monks themselves say matters most. The first change happens in thought. Chanting pulls the mind into what some teachers call a pre-thought state. It's not emptiness in the poetic sense, it's something more practical. When the sound is deep and continuous, the brain has less space for internal dialogue. The vibration coming from the chest and throat creates a kind of background hum that competes with ordinary mental noise. Instead of a stream of small opinions, memories, or worries, the mind narrows to the rhythm of the chant. A monk doesn't have to force himself to stop thinking. The sound does that work for him. Many practitioners describe it as slipping into awareness before language. It's the same mind but quieter, simpler, and much easier to direct. And now that we've seen what chanting does inside the monk, we can return to the mystery that opened this story. the strange sense that their voices blend into something more than human. Because when monks enter that state, when the I drops away, the sound naturally shifts from many voices into one. It's not an illusion, it's the intention made audible,